Colonel Richards wasn't just calling him in that day to remove him from duty. But when they met in the courtroom 72 hours later, the roles had completely reversed. Master Sergeant Michael Rodriguez was a 44-year-old logistics specialist who had been serving at Fort Bragg for 20 years. As the person responsible for the base's supply chain operations, he tracked thousands of dollars worth of military equipment. He lived near the base with his wife Linda and 2 children, and had only 3 years left until retirement. That Monday morning, he had arrived early as usual, grabbed his coffee, and went to his office. While opening his computer and checking routine inventory reports, an anomaly caught his attention. 5 of the new night vision devices received last week were showing as missing. Michael immediately called Staff Sergeant Davis, the warehouse supervisor. Davis, 5 of the night vision devices appear to be missing. Did you check? Yes, Master Sergeant, Davis said hesitantly. I recounted last night. There really are 5 missing. Michael frowned. Each of these pieces of equipment was worth $4,000. $20,000 worth of military equipment couldn't just disappear. Who had the last access? This week there was a special request from Colonel Richards' office. 5 night vision devices and 2 military radios. It was said to be for special operations training. As Michael's stomach turned. Colonel Richards was the base's second in command and responsible for special operations unit training. But in Michael's 20 years of experience, he knew no training required such equipment transfers. Was this request in writing? Yes. There's a signed order, but the return date has passed. Michael visited the warehouse and examined the documents. Everything looked legal, but something seemed off to Michael's experienced eye. Special operations units had their own equipment. Why would they request from the logistics depot? At lunch, Michael spoke with Staff Sergeant Thompson, the security unit chief. Tom, has there been any special operations training at the base recently? Thompson shook his head. No training was planned this month. Why do you ask? Michael explained the situation. Thompson's expression became serious. Mike, this is a serious matter. If equipment is really missing, we need to report it to the Criminal Investigation Division. I know, but I should talk to Colonel Richards first. Maybe he has a legitimate explanation. The next day, Michael made an appointment with Colonel Richards' office. Richards was in his 50s, large-built, with a stern demeanor. It was always said that he had political ambitions and would use any connection to become a general. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, Richards said, as Michael entered the office. Sit down. What did you want to see me about? Sir, about the special equipment that left the logistics depot last week. Night vision devices and radios. Richard's expression immediately changed. A hardness appeared in his eyes. What about them? Sir, their return dates have passed. I want to check which training they were used for. Richards got up from his desk and went to the window. Rodriguez, you've been working here for a very long time. Sometimes curiosity can be harmful. Michael felt a chill down his spine. Was this an open threat? Sir, I'm just following standard procedure. Standard procedure? Richards turned and looked at Michael. Standard procedure is not questioning the orders given to you by your ranking superior. Sir, I need to know where the equipment is. Richards approached and sat across from Michael. The equipment is being used for a classified operation. I don't recommend asking any more questions. Michael listened carefully. A classified operation at Fort Bragg. This was impossible. All classified operations were conducted overseas. I understand, sir. Good. Then I don't want you to bring up this subject again. When Michael left the office, his entire body was tense. In his 20-year career, he had never received such an open threat, and Richard's behavior was definitely suspicious. That evening at home, he talked with Linda. You have a problem, Linda said, reading Michael's face. Michael explained the situation. Linda, being a military spouse for 18 years, took Michael's concerns seriously. This looks very dangerous, Mike. Maybe you should request a transfer. No, if there really is corruption, I need to report it. This is my duty. The next day, Michael went to the base's Criminal Investigation Division office and met with Special Agent Sarah Chen. Chen was an experienced military investigator. Master Sergeant, Chen said after listening to Michael's report. Is there physical evidence to support these allegations? Michael showed the documents. Chen examined them carefully. This looks like a normal process, but as you said, the time has passed. We can start an investigation. How long will it take? A few weeks, however. Be careful. If there really is an illegal situation, the other side might try to silence you. Michael's fears became reality 3 days later. When he came to his office that Tuesday morning, there was an official document on his desk. Master Sergeant Michael Rodriguez has been placed under investigation for negligence and dereliction of duty. Report immediately to Colonel Richards' office. Michael's heart raced. What was he being charged with? When he went to Richards' office, Major Williams, the military prosecutor, was also there. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, Major Williams said, "You are facing charges of providing military equipment to unauthorized personnel." Michael was shocked. "Sir? What do you mean?" Richards opened a file. "According to these reports, you gave night vision equipment to civilian contractors last month and received money for it. This is completely false." Michael said, "I never gave equipment to any civilians." "Your signature is on these documents," Richards said, showing the papers. Michael examined the documents. His signature was indeed there, but he had never seen these papers. "These signatures are fake. I never saw these documents." "Master Sergeant," Major Williams said, "these are serious charges. If you are found guilty, you could face court-martial." Michael's world was collapsing. Richards was setting him up. "I will prove my innocence," Michael said determinedly. "I hope so," Richards said with a cold smile. "But in the meantime, all your security clearances are suspended and you are removed from logistics operations." That evening, Michael was on the verge of losing it. Linda was trying to calm him down. "Stay calm, Mike. The truth will come out. What if it doesn't? What if Richards has made me a scapegoat?" Michael immediately called his brother Paul, who was a civilian lawyer. Paul was familiar with military law. "Mike," Paul said on the phone, "this is obviously a setup. You're clean. We need to prove this." "How?" "First, we need to have those fake documents forensically analyzed. Handwriting analysis, signature comparison." Michael met with his own lawyer the next day. Civilian attorney Captain Morrison was an independent source not part of the base's legal team. "This case is very suspicious," Morrison said. "Normally these types of transfer records should have multiple witnesses and approval layers. So what can we do? We'll conduct our own investigation to support the CID investigation. We can also use internal whistleblower protection." Michael's situation spread rapidly around the base. While some soldiers looked at him with suspicion, those who knew him offered support. Sergeant Davis approached him. "Master Sergeant, I need to tell you something." "What?" "The day I received those night vision equipment, I saw Colonel Richards' car parked at the loading dock. It was unusual because officers normally don't come to that area. This was the first concrete laid." Michael immediately informed Morrison. Morrison deepened his investigation. He examined the base's security camera records. Richards' car was indeed seen at the loading dock that day. Morrison also began investigating Richards' financial situation. According to publicly available records, Richards had shown an unusual increase in spending over the past 6 months. 2 weeks later, Agent Chen from CID gave Michael an update. "Master Sergeant, our preliminary investigation found information in your favor." "What?" "The signatures on the fake documents failed forensic analysis. These are obvious forgeries." Michael breathed a sigh of relief. "Also," Chen continued, "we see Colonel Richards at suspicious times in the loading dock security footage. So what happens now? We're opening an official investigation. An inquiry will be launched regarding Richards." The next week, Michael's nightmare ended. The CID investigation revealed that Richards had been selling military equipment to the civilian black market. Richards and several accomplices were arrested. Michael's court-martial was cancelled and all charges were dismissed. Additionally, he received a commendation medal for his whistleblowing courage. At Richards' court-martial, Michael spoke as a witness. "The defendant," Michael said at the stand, "tried to destroy my career to silence me. But the truth always comes out. Richards received an 8-year sentence and was dishonorably discharged from the military. Michael remained at Fort Bragg until retirement and was promoted to head of the logistics department. In the final years of his career, he provided military ethics and anti-corruption training. At his retirement ceremony, the commanding general said, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, through his integrity, protected not only his career, but also the credibility of the military justice system. That day Michael understood that sometimes the hardest war is fought against those wearing the same uniform. But standing up for what's right is always worthwhile. When he transitioned to civilian life, Michael began working in veteran affairs. He supported whistleblowers in military corruption cases. One day, a young soldier from his old unit called him. Master Sergeant, my commander is giving me questionable orders. What should I do? Michael gave him this advice. Soldier, courage is required not only on the battlefield, but sometimes in telling the truth to your own institution. That conversation reminded Michael what his career's most meaningful victory had been. Not money or rank, but protecting integrity. Years later, Richard's corruption scandal became a case study in military education. Michael's story was told in ethics training for young officers at Fort Bragg. Michael occasionally came as a guest speaker and gave this message. Military hierarchy must be respected. But hierarchy cannot be abused to cover illegal activities. Every soldier's first duty is loyalty to the Constitution and values. One day, when his grandson decided to join the military, Michael told him, Son, wearing a uniform is an honor, but real honor lies in being able to say no to things that aren't right. Michael's legacy lived not only in his own career, but also in the other soldiers he inspired. In the aftermath of the Richards case, military whistleblower protections were strengthened. Michael's story ultimately showed this. Individual courage can create systematic change. One person's integrity can protect an entire institution. Years after that memorable Monday morning, Michael was enjoying his retirement peacefully, but he knew in his heart that his greatest victory wasn't rank or recognition, but having stood up for what was right. He had learned the most important lesson of his military career. Real strength wasn't in abusing power, but in resisting power with truth. Michael's story had become legendary at Fort Bragg. Young soldiers would visit his office and seek advice about moral dilemmas. Master Sergeant, a young private said one day, my commander wants me to do something illegal, but I don't want to risk my career. Michael gave him this answer. Son, your real career begins with being able to look at yourself in the mirror. Can you sleep at night with the work you do? These conversations reminded Michael how difficult but necessary it was to make the right decision. Michael's wife Linda had observed his transformation over the years. Mike, she said one evening, you became stronger after the Richards incident. It's like you found out who you really are. Michael smiled. Maybe I was always like this. I just hadn't been tested. Tested? To understand whether your values really matter, you need to risk losing them. This thought comforted Michael. The moment he confronted Richards was the moment he fought not just for his career, but for who he was. During his retirement years, Michael conducted research on military history. The subject of moral courage particularly interested him. Throughout history, he said during a lecture at the university one day, the greatest military victories have sometimes emerged from the greatest moral decisions. Among the audience were young officers from Fort Bragg. They already knew Michael's story. The question is this, Michael continued, what kind of soldier do you want to be? One who blindly follows orders, or one who acts with conscience? After the conference, a young lieutenant approached him. Sir, can I be as brave as you? Michael touched him. Courage is like a muscle, son. It gets stronger the more you use it. These encounters reminded Michael of his purpose. He hadn't just saved his own career, he had become an example for the next generation of soldiers. When Michael's grandson was accepted to the military academy, he wrote to him, Grandpa, I read your story. I hope to be an honorable soldier like you. This letter made Michael proud. His legacy was continuing. While Richards was in prison, he had written a letter to Michael. Rodriguez, I expected you to hate me, but I researched you still give ethics training even after my crime. Why? Michael had written back. Because you were once a good soldier too, Richards. The system corrupted you. My goal is to prevent others from making your mistakes. This correspondence showed the depth of Michael's character. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking solutions. As years passed, Michael's story entered textbooks at military academies. It became known as the Rodriguez case. One day, Michael was invited to speak to the Military Ethics Committee at the Pentagon. "Generals," he said in the large hall, "our greatest enemy isn't external forces, but the corruption within ourselves." The silence in the hall showed the impact of his words. Every soldier's conscience is the most powerful radar system. We must teach them to listen to it. After this speech, a conscience committee was established at the Pentagon. Michael also served as an advisor. In his final years, Michael learned that Richard's sentence had ended. The former colonel was now working as a construction worker. By chance, Richards called Michael. "Rodriguez, can I meet with you?" Michael hesitated, then agreed. When they met, Richards had changed a lot. He looked aged and humble. "I want to apologize to you," Richards said. "What I did was terrible." Michael looked at him. "Apology is important, Richards, but more importantly, whether you've changed." "I have changed. Now I mentor young workers. I teach them honesty." Michael smiled. "Good. Everyone deserves a second chance." This encounter reminded Michael of the power of forgiveness. It was harder than taking revenge, but more meaningful. Michael's story ended this way. One man's struggle for honesty had changed not only his own life, but his entire institution. When he entered Richard's office that Monday morning, he wasn't just questioning missing equipment. He was actually questioning what military values meant. And the answer he received brought the greatest victory of his career. That Monday morning, when he discovered the missing night vision devices, Michael couldn't have known he was about to embark on a journey that would define not only his career, but his character. The decision to pursue the truth, despite the personal cost, would ultimately transform the very institution he served. Years later, when military historians studied the transformation of Fort Bragg's ethics programs, they would point to this moment as a turning point. One man's refusal to look the other way had created ripples that touched every corner of military culture. The Rodriguez Doctrine, as it came to be known in military ethics courses, established a simple principle: institutional loyalty never supersedes moral obligation. This principle would guide a new generation of military leaders who understood that true service meant protecting not just the nation, but the values that defined it. Michael often reflected on how different his life might have been if he had simply ignored those missing night vision devices. But he knew, deep in his heart, that ignoring them would have meant ignoring who he was meant to be. Some battles choose the warrior, not the other way around. In his final years, Michael took comfort in knowing that his grandson would enter a military that had been shaped, in some small way, by his decision to speak truth to power. The uniform meant more than rank or recognition. It meant the courage to do right, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The legacy of that Monday morning would outlive them all. 10 years after his retirement, Michael was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee investigating military procurement fraud. His case had become the foundation for major reforms in military oversight and whistleblower protection. "Mr. Rodriguez," said Congressman Williams, the committee chairman, "your actions at Fort Bragg led to the recovery of over $2.3 million in stolen military equipment and the prosecution of 17 individuals across multiple bases. How do you feel about that impact?" Michael adjusted his tie and looked directly at the camera broadcasting the hearing live. "Congressman, I never set out to change the system. I just couldn't sleep at night, knowing equipment meant to protect our soldiers was being sold on the black market." The hearing room was packed with military personnel, veterans advocates, and journalists. Michael's testimony was being covered by every major news network. The Rodriguez Protocol, as it had come to be known, required independent oversight of all military equipment transfers valued over $5,000. It also established protected channels for military personnel to report suspected corruption without fear of retaliation. After the hearing, Michael was approached by a young Army captain named Jennifer Martinez. "Sir," she said, "I'm stationed at Fort Hood. We have a similar situation there. My commanding officer is pressuring me to falsify inventory reports." Michael handed her his card. "Captain, call me tomorrow. You're not alone in this." This conversation reminded Michael that his work was far from over. Corruption was like a hydra. Cut off one head, and 2 more appeared. That evening, Michael met with a group of military reformers at a Washington, D.C. restaurant. The group included retired generals, investigative journalists, and legal advocates who had made military accountability their life's work. "Michael," said retired General Patricia Hayes, "we want to establish a foundation, the Rodriguez Foundation for Military Ethics. Will you head it?" Michael was surprised. "General, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified." "You're the most qualified person in America," she replied. "You've lived it." 6 months later, the Rodriguez Foundation opened its doors in Colorado Springs, just outside Fort Carson. The foundation provided legal support, counseling, and protection for military whistleblowers across all branches of service. Michael's first major case came from a Navy petty officer at Norfolk Naval Base, who had discovered that submarine parts were being replaced with substandard components to increase profits for defense contractors. "Petty Officer Williams," Michael said during their first meeting, "I know you're scared. I was scared too. But lives depend on the integrity of those components." The case took 8 months to resolve, but it ultimately led to the recall of defective parts from 12 submarines and the prosecution of a major defense contractor. Michael's reputation grew within military circles. Active duty personnel would seek him out at military bases across the country. He became known as the soldier's advocate. One day, while visiting Fort Benning to investigate reports of training equipment fraud, Michael received an unexpected call. It was Colonel Richards, now 5 years out of prison. "Rodriguez," Richards said, his voice different than Michael remembered. "I'm calling to thank you." Michael was puzzled. "Thank me for what?" "For not giving up on me. The foundation sent someone to visit me in prison, helped me get clean, get my head straight. I've been sober for 3 years now." Michael learned that the Rodriguez Foundation had established a rehabilitation program for military personnel convicted of corruption. The program focused on understanding the systemic pressures that led to ethical failures. "Richards," Michael said, "everyone deserves a second chance." "What are you doing now?" "I'm working with at-risk youth in Detroit, teaching them about accountability and making good choices. It's not much, but it's honest work." This conversation reinforced Michael's belief that true justice involved redemption, not just punishment. The Foundation's most challenging case came from an Air Force colonel at Peterson Air Force Base, who reported that an entire squadron of F-16s had been grounded due to falsified maintenance records. "Colonel Thompson," Michael said during their secure meeting, "this could affect national readiness. We need to move quickly." The investigation revealed that maintenance contractors had been signing off on work that was never performed, pocketing the money while leaving aircraft in potentially dangerous condition. "Michael," Thompson said after the case was resolved, "I almost didn't come forward. My career, my pension, everything was on the line." "What changed your mind?" Michael asked. "I remembered your story, how you risked everything for the truth. If you could do it, so could I." The case led to a complete overhaul of Air Force maintenance oversight and the prosecution of a contracting company that had defrauded the government of $47 million. As the foundation grew, Michael began receiving international attention. NATO allies invited him to speak about military accountability. He traveled to Germany, the UK, and Australia, sharing the lessons learned from American military reforms. "The uniform represents something sacred," he told a gathering of European military leaders in Brussels. "When we allow corruption to taint that uniform, we betray every person who has ever worn it honorably." Back home, Michael's influence continued to spread. The Rodriguez Foundation had helped process over 200 cases of suspected military fraud, resulting in recoveries of more than $50 million and the prosecution of 89 individuals. But the work took its toll. Michael was now in his late 50s, and the constant travel and stress were wearing on him. Linda suggested he consider stepping back. "Mike," she said one evening, as they sat on their porch in Colorado Springs, "you've done enough. Let someone else carry the torch." Michael looked out at the mountains, thinking about all the young military personnel who were still fighting corruption within the system. "I can't retire yet," he said. "There are too many people who need help." The Foundation's most significant victory came when Congress passed the Military Accountability and Transparency Act, legislation that had been drafted with input from Michael and his team. President Harrison invited Michael to the White House for the signing ceremony. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," the president said before signing the bill, "your courage 20 years ago has made our military stronger and more accountable. This legislation ensures that future generations of service members will have the protections you fought to create. As Michael watched the president sign the bill into law, he thought about that Monday morning at Fort Bragg, when he first noticed the missing night vision devices. Who could have predicted that moment of curiosity would lead to this? After the ceremony, Michael was approached by a young Marine Lance Corporal, who had driven from Quantico to attend the event. "Sir," the Marine said, "I'm Lance Corporal David Rodriguez. I'm your grandnephew. My grandfather was your cousin." Michael was stunned. "David, what are you doing here?" "I enlisted because of your story, sir. I want to serve with honor, like you did." This unexpected meeting reminded Michael that his legacy was now living in the next generation of service members, who understood that true patriotism sometimes meant challenging the institution you served. The Foundation's work expanded beyond fraud investigation. They established leadership programs for young military officers, teaching ethical decision-making and moral courage. Leadership isn't about rank, Michael would tell each new class. It's about having the courage to do right when everyone else is doing wrong. One of his students, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, no relation to the investigator who had helped him, went on to expose a major procurement scandal at Fort Knox, saving the Army millions of dollars. "Mr. Rodriguez taught us that being a whistleblower isn't about betraying your unit," Chen said in her testimony to Congress. "It's about protecting it." As Michael entered his 60s, he began working on his memoirs. The book, titled The Night Vision, A Soldier's Fight for Truth, became a bestseller and was required reading at all military academies. The book's dedication read, "To Linda, who stood by me when the truth was dangerous, and to every service member who chooses courage over comfort." During his book tour, Michael was frequently asked about his regrets. "Do I regret reporting the missing equipment?" he would respond. "Never. But I regret that it took so long for the system to protect people like me. My hope is that future whistleblowers won't have to risk as much as I did." The Foundation established the Michael Rodriguez Scholarship for children of military whistleblowers, recognizing that families often paid a price for their parents' courage. The first recipient was the daughter of a Navy chief who had exposed safety violations in nuclear submarine operations. Her father had been transferred to an isolated duty station as retaliation, but his revelations had prevented a potential catastrophe. "My father taught me that doing right isn't always easy," the scholarship recipient said at the awards ceremony, "but it's always worth it." Michael's health began declining in his mid-60s. Years of stress and travel had taken their toll. But he continued working, driven by letters from young service members who credited him with giving them the courage to speak up. One letter, from a soldier in Afghanistan, particularly moved him. "Sir, I discovered that body armor was being replaced with inferior versions to increase profits. I remembered your story and reported it. The investigation saved lives. Thank you for showing me the way." Linda finally convinced Michael to step back from day-to-day operations of the Foundation. He would remain as chairman emeritus, but younger advocates would handle the fieldwork. "You've built something that will outlast both of us," Linda told him. "It's time to enjoy what you've accomplished." Michael's final public appearance was at Fort Bragg, where the base unveiled the Rodriguez Integrity Center, a facility dedicated to ethics training and support for military personnel facing moral dilemmas. "This center represents something more than my name," Michael said at the dedication ceremony. "It represents every service member who has chosen truth over career, principle over promotion." In the audience that day were dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Michael's work. Former clients who had blown the whistle on corruption, young officers who had attended his leadership programs, and military families who had benefited from the reforms he had championed. Colonel Jennifer Martinez, the young captain who had first approached him after the Congressional hearing, was now a full colonel and commander of the facility. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," she said in her remarks, "showed us that one person's courage can change an entire institution. This center will ensure that his example lives on." As Michael sat in the front row, surrounded by Linda and their extended family, he reflected on the journey that had begun with 5 missing night vision devices. He thought about Colonel Richards, now working with troubled youth in Detroit. He thought about the hundreds of service members who had found the courage to speak truth to power. He thought about the millions of dollars in fraud that had been stopped and the countless lives that had been protected. But mostly he thought about that Monday morning 25 years ago, when he had chosen to ask questions instead of looking the other way. That choice had defined not just his career, but his life. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to mingle, a young Army private approached Michael. "Sir," the private said, "I start my assignment here next week. Any advice?" Michael smiled, remembering all the young soldiers who had asked him similar questions over the years. "Private," he said, "remember that the uniform doesn't make you honorable. Your choices do. Choose wisely." That evening, as Michael and Linda drove home to Colorado Springs, they passed by Fort Carson, where Michael's journey had begun decades earlier. "No regrets?" Linda asked, as she had so many times before. Michael looked at the American flag flying over the base, illuminated by spotlights in the gathering dusk. "None," he said. "Not a single one." The legacy of Master Sergeant Michael Rodriguez would endure long after his retirement. The systems he had helped create, the people he had inspired, and the principles he had defended would continue to protect the integrity of the military he had served with such honor. In the end, his story proved a simple truth, that courage is contagious, justice is possible, and sometimes one person really can change the world. All it takes is the decision to ask the right questions, even when, especially when, powerful people don't want you to ask them. 25 years after 5 night vision devices went missing at Fort Bragg, the ripples of that discovery were still spreading, protecting service members and taxpayers alike from those who would abuse the trust placed in them. Michael Rodriguez had achieved something rare in any profession. He had made his institution better by refusing to accept less than its highest ideals. That, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all,